Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you today. You talk about passion and sustainability, and John captured it. Athena is the queen when it comes to it. So Athena, thank you for your continued leadership. John, I'm so excited that you're stepping into this role now, leading the organization on its sustainability efforts. DEP has a tremendous opportunity to be a continued leader, to bring business and to bring the community together, to move the state forward, to really be a role model nationally and internationally in sustainability efforts. So I commend you, the whole team, a lot of my colleagues at DEP who are here today, but I commend you and I encourage you, and we're here at BIA to support you as you continue those efforts going forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about today the role of sustainable business and what that means relative to the business itself, but as well as in the community setting and what it takes to get there. And we always talk about, and John used that word again, that disruption. This is this whole new key word, disruption, when something is a disruptor. Usually that was a negative word. The word disruption now means innovation and excitement. And so the question I always pose when I start this discussion is, is sustainability a disruptive innovation or a key driver of innovation? And I know a lot of you know the answer to that, and when we get to the end of the presentation, I'm sure you'll all be nodding your head saying, yeah, we know that innovation and sustainability go hand in hand with each other. So from the business perspective, NJBIA represents 20,000 businesses across the state of New Jersey. That equates to 1.2 million jobs in the state of New Jersey. And we have an interest in ensuring that we can be a leader to help facilitate collaboration and dialogue around sustainability, because I understand the importance of that intersection between economic growth, economic health, with environmental quality and the impact on society. Those three legs of the stool and that sweet spot right in the middle, that sustainability is really key for the state to be strong in the long term. And so we look forward to being a partner and fostering leadership in this area and being a connector to our 20,000 businesses for why there is a business case for sustainability. Something we see oftentimes is larger companies, like who are on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. I bet a lot of people didn't even know there's a sustainability index, but there is. Larger companies have picked up, and they've been in the business, probably for about a decade now. But they have stronger resources. Many of the large companies have sustainability officers now. That has become a role in the C-suite that is very important and part of moving big companies forward. But BIA and our 20,000 members that I talk about, overwhelming small business. And so we need to find ways to help to show, educate, and bring small business along to understand that they can afford to do this, that in the end, the return on investment for them is significant for their health in the future of their business as well as for our society. So why should business care? We talk about sustainability and the triple bottom line. That triple, again, is environment, economic, social. And we know oftentimes for businesses that get in the game, it's all about gaining competitive advantage. Nowadays, consumers are looking for green products and green services, so a lot of competitive advantage. You all know how it reduces cost. Every time that you can minimize your waste, your water use, your use of energy, that's right to your bottom line. That's dollars right back in your pocket. Anytime you can make a product or a service process more efficient, that lowers your cost and makes you more productive, which increases your profits later on. Liability, legal costs. A lot of times now when you're in the green business, you're seeing the opportunity to advance lower liability insurance, and then going into the idea of increasing your profitability, supply chain. Right now I would say that every big company, that's not fair, I can't say every, majority of the big companies are demanding green down their supply chain. Oftentimes I'll have our smaller businesses come to us and say, can you please connect me with the supply chain for XYZ company? And my discussion right back to them is going to say, in order for you to get into that supply chain, you're going to have to consider what they demand in the supply chain. And I can tell you that many of the big companies who have a very long supply chain are demanding green all the way down the line. So another reason why small business needs to make sure that they are taking on sustainability practices if they want to get into those long supply chains. We know that investors are looking at this. I mentioned the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. More and more investors are looking for companies that are utilizing green practices, and that's where the investments are going. Access to loans and grants, the image in the marketplace, getting market share, improving your relationship with government, something we like to talk about all the time. I remember from my years at DEP that if you had a green company, whether they were a registered company here or someone who was in the stewardship program, oftentimes their process through DEP would be less complicated because they were already doing a lot of those right things. And as a result of doing those right things, their permits move quicker. There's absolute cost savings in that. And of course, in appreciating and enhancing that relationship with government, it's just the idea that when those businesses come in the door, oftentimes it's like they have that better housekeeping seal of approval stamp on them, and we know who we're dealing with across the table. And as a regulator, it makes it easier for you to know who's there, and then you feel better about what they're bringing to you. Attracting job candidates, think about this. I mean, how many people, especially millennials are very much into sustainability. So when you're looking to attract a good workforce, a strong competitive workforce, having green processes and green products as part of your repertoire is really important to getting that attractive and competitive workforce. Also, worker safety is a big issue with this, increased productivity, but at the bottom line, we all know it's the right thing to do. So when we talk about this idea, triple bottom line, I like walking us through the balance sheet from the very traditional and historic to where we are today, because I think this tells a very, very important story. So you're looking up behind me, so we are on the right side, which is the very traditional balance sheet, where everything was about cash and monetized impacts to an organization. It was all about capital, operations, and maintenance. It was about the green, the hard dollars, right? Everything was financial concern on the traditional balance sheet. Over time, we started to see some migration into the center of this slide, which talks about internal non-cash impact. Think about this. All of a sudden, people were saying, you know what? There's some real value to the HR. These are the soft costs. And it's taken a long time to learn how to monetize soft costs, right? But inside an organization, there was a whole idea of making your HR and your human resource more productive and mobility, and the whole idea of health and safety driving your bottom line, right? The healthier your workforce is, usually the lower your insurance for that workforce may be. So there's a lot of pluses. So businesses started to get the idea of internalizing those soft costs, but looking at how they measured to the bottom line. Well, now, under a sustainable return on investment and a balance sheet, we've now learned how to monetize external impact. And this is the newest piece, and this is why things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index exist, because now we're looking at how do we monetize a company's impact on greenhouse gases, on measuring air contaminants, and on water, wastewater, and savings of energy. And these are things now being taken into consideration at the CFO level in the C-suite, and we see a big shift on what was the traditional balance sheet to now monetizing these types of externalities as well. Very important. How do these things fall in the buckets, right? The cash side's pretty easy. We talk about anything that you can really see in green. So every time you save a dollar, that dollar goes back into your company. That's easy to show someone. That's easy to educate people on. Reduced cost translates into savings and profits. The non-cash side, how do you begin to monetize things like reducing your carbon footprint, conserving fresh water, making improvements in health and safety? And as we said, I gave some examples along the way of how we are able to do that now and why it's so important to the bottom line. And of course, having those happy workers and what that means across the way for them. So this all sounds really good, but how do we get it done? You know, it's one thing to sit here and say, oh, those are really nice principles. Oh, sure, that model makes a lot of sense. But everything is about practicality and how we put it into play, right? So as companies, we need to be asking ourselves, you know, are we planning? Are we reacting? Are we adapting? And are we doing this in the sphere of looking at our current and our future challenges, right? We have to be ahead of the game. We've got to be a leader. We've got to be ahead. So sustainable practices require activity at every level of the organization, every level. So it's one thing for, you know, the CEO of the organization to come in and say, we're going to be green. But if he doesn't spend time with the staff from the entry-level position all the way up to the top, talking about understanding what that means and how everybody plays into it every day when they walk in the building, it's got to be embedded in the culture and the fabric of the organization, or it doesn't work. It's like any other type of work practice that you have in business. If you don't start at the bottom, if you don't get buy-in from the bottom, and if you don't keep it as part of your culture and your fabric, it doesn't work. So this requires strategies all across the organization. Strategies for how you build, for the products, for your services, for your processes, and how everybody is a part of that is significantly important. Most important, it takes transformational thinking. And this isn't easy because, again, you're going to be like a leader in this area. To do that, you have to look at things through a totally different paradigm. So we would suggest some of this paradigm shift takes into consideration the idea of viewing compliance as an opportunity. Now, John comes from the world of compliance from before, right? Every time someone hears enforcement and compliance, they start to shudder, right? Compliance is actually an opportunity. And when you step up in green and you're doing things that are complying, again, that probably makes your pathway through a permitting process much better and your relationship with government even better. And the leaders are seeing that and they know it. The whole idea of making those supply chains extremely valuable and being a valuable part of the supply chain, significantly important. As we talked about sustainable products and services, developing new business models and creating next practice platforms. These are the things that the C-suite needs to be thinking about. But again, they have to put it in practice. That includes everyone from the front line all the way up the chain in an organization. I would suggest to you that transformational thinking, that paradigm shift of before looking at things that were negatives and turning them into positives is really where innovation comes into play in companies, and companies are doing it every day. It's always looking about that better way to satisfy your customer, your employee, put out a better product, and be a leader in your industry. And we know there's a lot of challenges with this. Technology and the pace of technology and advancements very difficult to keep up with. So oftentimes this takes that transformational thinking at the top to say, and we're going to make a monetary investment in doing this. But chances are, 99% of the time, that monetary investment up front is going to pay dividends on the return on investment later. And this is where the important part of educating business on that return on investment for the long term is worth that investment up front. So of course, we know innovation is about sustainability. Sustainability is all about innovation. And I would suggest to you that means that is a catalyst for growth. And that's why it's such an important part of economic growth for the state of New Jersey. So it's not just about the individual business practice, though, and it doesn't just stop in the building. We really have to take a look at the environment within which our businesses and our individuals find themselves today and make sure that those environments are conducive to allowing these types of processes to come forward. So to drive real economic advantage, we go beyond the building itself, and we have to start looking in the community. And that includes, the landscape, the business climate, and the political environment that we find ourselves in at any given point in time. And we have to ask ourselves when we look at that environment, is it fostering innovation and new technology? Number one, are we in an environment that fosters innovation and new technology? Is the community infrastructure able to accept this growth? Is it there? And in infrastructure, we talk about everything from the pipes and the wires to the people in the community. Are investments in community infrastructure being made? And oftentimes this is where we come up short. And this is a topic that leads us right into managing our infrastructure and our assets. Now, when we talk about infrastructure and assets, we talk about it very comprehensive all across the board. We know that every day we drive on our roads and it's easy to see that our roads are in disrepair. And what's the top issue you hear when you turn on the radio every day? The Transportation Trust Fund, right? And you drive the roads and you see the potholes and you hear about the buildings. And that's right in front of you and that's obvious and there's a call to action on that. But let's not forget what's above and below those roads and those bridges, right? Our water, our wastewater, our energy, our telecommunication. Infrastructure all across the board needs strategy for long-term investment. And we need to look and see whether or not we are, as a community, whether it's the local level, the county level, the state level, willing to make those investments that we need to make. Now, when I use that word investment, everybody usually starts shuddering, okay? Because investment means money. And everybody says, well, where are we getting that money? It's billions of dollars. You know what? It is billions of dollars, but it's billions of dollars over 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We are not talking about spending billions of dollars tomorrow. As soon as that one number's thrown out, everybody kind of runs for the hills and says, oh my God, tax increase, what are we going to do? No, the idea of a good strategy is starting today to look long-term, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and putting a plan in for long-term asset management planning that is affordable, and that investment comes back in a community to allow the economy to grow. Because again, we can't grow the economy on the local level if we don't have the right infrastructure there. We all know reliable infrastructure drives and promotes economic growth and development in any community across any state. New Jersey, not just by itself on this. Efficient systems and operation of those systems oftentimes is much more affordable than fixing the emergency in the immediate. And in the state we have so many examples about that. So when we talk about asset management, it's about the right investment at the right time, not spending $20 billion tomorrow. So I'd always suggest from our study of asset management, okay, there's 3 elements of asset management. Routinely doing an evaluation, an assessment, and understanding of what we have right now. What's the criticality of our infrastructure in the state today? What type of state is it in and what might it need? Having a programmed preventive maintenance program over time. Again, that 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Understanding where is your key vulnerability, looking at that in the short term, and then making sure that you have a plan for the other things along the way, and a procedure for evaluating the life cycle costs of repair and replacement of that. And if you stop and do all that, chances are you could probably look over those 20, 30, 40, 50 years and put a program together that can be affordable for everyone and allow for that economic development that we need. Having increased knowledge of our system fosters better financial decisions and influences choices when considering options on the challenges of our various systems. If we don't know the status of our infrastructure, how can we possibly begin to fix it? We can't, or maintain it. So we know that efficient and cost-effective operation of systems is a very smart move, and we have to look at ways to do that. And there may be great access to financial assistance to do. So I always love throwing out a shout out for the Environmental Infrastructure Trust. Dave Zimmer isn't here today, but Dave is the bank for DEP. And we know that there are financing options out there for infrastructure at the state level and at the federal level. And while they are limited and less than they've been historically, let's not ignore that they are there. And so let's see what can we do with the resources that we have on any given day now. So I always like to take a minute to talk about green infrastructure, because you can't talk about sustainable business practices and you can't talk about sustainable communities without giving an example. An example always near and dear to my heart was green infrastructure in water and wastewater. And I think we all know that anytime you bring green infrastructure into redevelopment or new development around water and wastewater, these are the types of things you see. You see harvesting rainwater for reuse, and you see infiltration, and you see the opportunity for rain barrels and green gardens and porous pavement. And all those things, again, while they may be a cost up front, the value of them over time reaps the return. Sustainable ROI, of course, environmentally, what you're doing is you're managing at the source, you're managing that stormwater volume to avoid flooding and also the threat of the runoff of those contaminants. At the same time, though, this is all very aesthetically pleasing. So when you talk about community and place-based type of economic development, these are the types of things that work. And of course, on the economic side, you're reducing your costs. You're reducing operation and maintenance. Costs of gray infrastructure oftentimes later will be less expensive if you start with green up front. And oftentimes you get a quicker impact on that return. And that's the value. So truly, these types of projects have that sustainable return on investment that can be seen. We talked about the impacts again on water quality, flooding. Of course, that's a huge issue for us in New Jersey, considering the storms we've had over the past few years. And of course, our water supply. I mean, we know we have critical water supply issues in certain aspects of our state, in certain parts. And sure, we can move water. If Fred Sickles were here, he'd say, we can move water any day. But what does it cost you to move that water, right? So how do you capture more water in the area where you are versus the cost of having to move that water from one place to another? So I would always suggest that there's public and private cost savings embedded in green infrastructure, and that's why it's a good idea. When you have stormwater management system based on green infrastructure rather than gray, often you have a lower capital cost. And let me just clarify here with a big caveat, you can't do all green. There's got to be gray. There's got to be a mixture of the two. We know that. But some of the things we were looking at while I was at DEP was the fact that if green can lead gray, the gray later will not be as expensive, and that green up front gets you a quicker return on investment, especially for CSO communities. Savings obviously derive from lower costs for grading, paving, et cetera. And especially in CSO communities, green infrastructure controls are much less expensive than gray. And again, will get you some immediate 5-year return for a lower investment. So, I asked at the beginning, is it disruptive innovation or key driver of innovation? I think we know the answer. It's a little bit of both, which is really good because it's disruptive up front, but something that's disruptive gets you thinking about where the next opportunity comes from. And that's really, really important. That's what leads to that transformational thinking. That's what gets us all at the top of the levels in those C-suites coming down and engaging our staff from the top up. And that's how we make it happen. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I think we have some time for Q&A, but that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? It's Friday afternoon. Yes, Sarah.
Do you have an idea out of the 20,000 businesses that you represent, how many or what percentage are implementing sustainable practices?
No, and actually we do these kind of mini pulse polls, And this is one that I'm like kind of looking at Peter Parrotsman as our Chief Communications Officer. And these are the types of things we want to get our hands around. So it is an important part of the whole aspect of business. And the BIA, one of our tenets on our lobbying is always driving down the cost of doing business. So if I'm here trying to make a business case for sustainability and green and know that it's a way to drive down business, we should get an understanding of where our members are and how we can be helpful to them in that regard. So I don't have that, but that's a great point. Yes.
To that point, what's your philosophy on reporting, sustainability reporting for businesses large and small?
So here's the big challenge, because every time you ask a business to report, it means you're asking them to generate paperwork. It means someone's taking time out of their regular day to do it. And usually that means a cost at the end of the day. So we don't believe in mandating behavior because mandates cost money. However, we are firm believers and staunch supporters of advocating and rewarding for best practices. And so we talk about things all across any issue that affects business, that where there are really great best practices and you can educate people on why they should come to it versus being mandated to get there. That's what we would appreciate, especially if you have enough businesses that are already in the space. Yes, sir.
Enjoyed your excellent summary of
Thank you.
The business case. Why do you think so often the opportunity costs of failing to make the kind of investments that you've been talking about seem to get less featured and less appreciated?
Everything comes back to education. So oftentimes, we don't do a good job of telling the positive stories. It's just it's a news thing. Everybody wants the doom and gloom. It's more sexy to talk about what's broken than what's working, right? So it's really incumbent upon us to be part of educating people on the other side of that. So let me give you an example. I said during my presentation that when you have an emergent situation occur, the cost to that versus having had operation and maintenance through a system. A few years ago, it was pre-Sandy, so I guess it was 12. It was July 4th weekend of 2012, I'm estimating, was the water main break at Swimming River. 4th of July weekend, Monmouth County, everybody's heading to the shore. About 5 towns were affected. The main leading all that water supply from the reservoir to the residents went down on a holiday weekend. Okay, think of who you have to get in there to fix that. Okay, that was 72 hours. That was 4, 5, 6 days of emergency repair, bringing people in from out of state, etc. The cost of that emergent situation is probably a few times fold what the overall cost of O&M over time may have been. So that's just an example of trying to shine a light on what's the cost of an emergent situation versus if you took those dollars and you invested them over the time of that 20, 30, 40, 50-year fix, understanding the vulnerabilities, et cetera, I think you can find that there's a case for the management of it over time. Sir?
The way you describe the different business cases and costs, you have both the small business and the business element of it, and then sort of the government side of it, right? And I might disagree with you a little bit about how many billions are going to be necessary in the short term, but I see a lot of burden shifting going on between the parties, whether it's business and government, as to who's going to come up with the money to do it. Do you see that, or I just don't see the numbers adding up when you start looking at both the business and the societal costs necessary to manage both the public infrastructure and their normal business operations.
The chart I had up, I don't know if I can jump back to it, but it was really, it was the cash and non-cash. It wasn't necessarily corporate versus government. Was that the one you were referencing?
Not really. Just
Okay.
Your entire presentation overall
Okay.
kind of shifted from the company perspective to one that was more of a government services and transportation sector conversation.
No, I think what I'm suggesting is that as government, we need to look long-term over time and see where money is and how we best leverage it. So again, I'm going to use the EIT as an example because it's a good example of leveraging dollars. And granted, when you don't have a dollar, financing it for a penny on the dollar is still, you got to come up with a dollar before it only costs you a penny per dollar, right? But if you look long-term and over time, there has got to be a model out there that suggests that over the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you can leverage dollars now that will get you to where you need to be over time. But every time we delay it, be it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, all you're doing is you're making the back end all that more expensive. So there are mechanisms to leverage dollars, and the EIT takes federal dollars that pass through the state of New Jersey, and it takes that money and then it goes and bonds it out. And when it does that bonding, because it has a AAA rating, it's able to do that at literally pennies on the dollar. You can't get that out in the private market.
Again, though, you haven't addressed this burden shifting problem.
Mm-hmm.
There was a presentation just a few weeks ago at the Commerce and Industries Manufacturing Center, and we talked about how the transportation infrastructure does 30-year financing for 10-year road repaving.
Well, but I would suggest to you that is broken. The TTF process is broken. I'm using the EIT as an example because that's a winning example. And I would suggest that we need to look at the EIT example in transportation going forward. And this is something that we have said to our policymakers. If we have the political will to raise the revenue needed to put into fund transportation, we better not put it back in the bank that is the TTF, because that bank is broken. I gave you an example that the EIT, you can find penny on the dollar. The TTF, its rating in order to go out and bond is in the tank. So, EIT has a AAA rating, TTF has something like, way, way below that, like C's, D's. So where we did a penny here, it's probably like 50 cents over here. So we need a whole new funding mechanism once we raise the revenue on transportation. We need a bank like the EIT in order to do transportation responsibly in the future. No, we cannot. We cannot take a 10-year project and fund it over 30 years and think that's going to work. So you and I agree 100% on that. So I would suggest the model that I'm talking about, the EIT model, is the model we always want to look at for purposes of long-term management for our infrastructure assets. Anyone else? Mike?
I can't agree with you more, Michele. And the whole public-private partnership
Yes.
Aspect of it. And let's face it, there's other things that the business community is challenged with. Both our organizations like public-private partnership, but when they throw prevailing wage in there and it rises the cost up of a project, that's when we have to intervene and look at the end game, where it's going to go. But I agree with you. The Environmental Infrastructure Trust, I've said for years, is the model that works, and it should go across, when government's looking at financing projects. So absolutely, I think you're spot on.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Michael.
So I was wondering, how, at BIA, what the future holds in terms of promoting sustainability to its members?
Mm-hmm. So we have a rather broad base at BIA. We have quite a few things on our plate right now. It's a new space for BIA, and I think we kind of only fell into the space because of my background and my passion for the issue, and my true belief that at the end of the day, you can show return on investment. It's a matter of educating. And so that's why we talk about partnering with, like what you're doing at DEP. We've talked with Ed Caracca. Ed and I had a great meeting a few weeks ago about how BIA can be more engaged in partnership with the small business development centers and the work they're doing with the Business Institute on this. So there's room for us. I mean, there's room for us to help to advance and advocate for good policies that lead in this direction, as well as being there. Probably the best role we can play is helping to educate our members. We are great at educating, and we are great at facilitating collaboration. That's two things that BIA is outstanding at. And of course, we have a great voice too. So anyway, we could be helpful as long as it's a responsible policy that removing that doesn't drive up the cost of doing business in a way that is not appropriate, that creates jobs, and that helps to cut red tape. All this stuff is great at cutting red tape. That's that whole idea of good partnership with government. When you come in permitting, if you're a green business, chances are you've cut your own red tape because they know that you're a trusted soul when you come in. Okay. Good. It's been a pleasure. Oh, yep. Go ahead.
Just as you mentioned, the critical need to have all levels of an organization engaged and truly embracing sustainability. From your experience, what has been are some of the key drivers in doing that? Is it top-down, strategic planning, mission kind of stuff, or more bottom-up, or have you seen it work effectively both ways?
So it's probably a little bit of both, but you have to, tone at the top is the most important. If you don't have someone at the top that truly believes in it and that executes the culture every day, then you're not going to go anywhere. Because people at the bottom are going to say, well, why should I care if the CEO doesn't care, right? So all starts with tone at the top. However, tone at the top can't like just drive it down and say, I demand that you do this. So you really have to build the culture, like everything else you do in your organization. If if you're a culture of collaboration, if you're a culture of teamwork, if you're a culture of innovation, whatever it is that are the foundation tools upon which your company is based, you just have to embed this as part of it, and it becomes really part of what you live and breathe every day in your office. And then you reward people and you recognize people who exemplify it. And you make them examples, and people go, oh, that's what that is. I didn't think I understood what that meant. That's what that is. That's great. I like that. So, and they will come in. The sustainability bus, they'll get on if they believe in it. All right. Well, it was a pleasure joining you all today. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks.